Hi, guys and gals. Today we get into one of the bigger goals that I have here, and that is to talk about personality pieces that allow you to be successful and also some pieces that have made people failures in the past. So we can take a look at some of these things and try to emulate some of them in our own lives. And with this, we're going to take a look at people like Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S Grant, Robert E. Lee, and try to see what made them successful, and then look at somebody like George McClellan and pinpoint what made him a failure. The objective altogether is to evaluate how you may employ these lessons of effective leadership in your life, and also at the same time, try to avoid failure. I think each of these people offers us some different goals to strive for, some different things that we should try to employ in our lives to be better people, whether we're leaders or whether we're just employees or students or whatever role we have, but things where we can look at and say, okay, I want to be like that. That's going to make me a better person in my life. And so each one of these people, you can see little traits about them that show you how to be a successful person or how you can fail at some things in life. Now, let's discuss first Abraham Lincoln. At the beginning of the war, he made some mistakes. He did establish himself well with his cabinet. That was one very positive thing, as he proved himself very quickly with the move that he made with Fort Sumter. But when it came to only asking for 90-day enlistments at the beginning of the war, only having the soldiers sign up for 90 days, that was not a good enough commitment for them to actually really be able to do anything with that army. And so he made a stupid decision there. He also pressured Irvin McDowell into fighting way too quickly, and also pressured Winfield Scott into it. So Abraham Lincoln eventually realized he really didn't know anything about war. He put himself into as many books as possible, read as many books as he could, sat down as much as he could with Winfield Scott, tried to get as educated as he could about battle. And so by the time you get into the second year and the third year of the war, the guy actually very well knew military strategy. He knew tactics. He knew what his generals needed. And so he turned himself into somebody that at first he was not in any way intelligent about battle, but he turned himself into somebody that was capable. And that's something we should learn from him here, is that when we see a weakness in our lives, let's make it a strength. Let's do everything we can, read every book we can, study up as much as possible, and try to make ourselves better in that area that's a weakness. Now, the second person here is Ulysses S. Grant. For Ulysses S. Grant, he did have some failures in the Battle of Shiloh at the beginning, but in the end, he showed something tremendous about him. He was able to focus in, he's able to commit, he's able to keep trying to find the way to victory. So he'll try again. One little story about the guy that I think is kind of interesting is that they say that they would sometimes catch him in his office, catch him in his tent as he's poring over maps, trying to study where to go, where to attack, how to get to the enemy. And as he'd need another map, the guy would not even get out of his crouch, or he'd stay in like a bent down position because he would just be so focused in that he didn't want to stand up. He didn't want to like go get a drink of coffee. He didn't want to like break his focus for anything. And so he'd stay crouched and he just kind of stay in that mode and just be so laser focused. The same thing went on the battlefield. When the battle was in action, he was always going around and rallying soldiers, and he was just focused in on trying to find, okay, how are we going to defend this area? Where are we going to attack the enemy? What are we going to do to win this battle? And so he would keep on focusing in on trying. And at the same time, he had such great faith that his men could do it. They could win, that eventually they started to believe in themselves. But yes, he did have some pitfalls, but his focus and his trust in his men is what really led him to victory and success. Robert E. Lee. Many different great things about this guy. First off, he was an extremely committed student. He knew everything he could possibly be asked to know about military strategy and tactics. Now, one of his greatest qualities was knowing the enemy, knowing the opponent. He could absolutely predict what the textbook would say you should do in this area. If you're in this land, if you have the high ground, whatever the situation is, he could predict what you're supposed to do. And then he'd also get to know that opponent, get to know their personal traits, and then he could make even more fantastic predictions about what they would do. This guy was playing chess when everybody else is playing checkers. Now, he also was willing to give all the credit to his soldiers if he was successful. He was always just, he'd defer that to them. And if he failed, commonly he'd shoulder the blame himself and not put it on anybody else. He also had great trust with his corps commanders like James Longstreet and Stonewall Jackson. So he had great communication, great trust. He believed that they would do what was necessary to bring about victory. But so many positive things about Robert E. Lee. Stonewall Jackson, many positive things about this guy too. I mentioned within the Peninsula Campaign, specifically in the Shenandoah Valley Campaign, that he had studied map after map after map to try to make sure that he knew every piece of real estate in the western side of Virginia. So he put in the time to study and know it completely. Now, also, and whenever his soldiers were successful, he put the praise on them. He gave them the credit. He did not take it himself. And if he lost, he was willing to wear that on his shoulders. And so a good leader gives credit to the people around them, but also takes the blame when something bad occurs. They put it on their shoulders. They don't put it on the people that are following them. But a good leader wears that and wears that well. And they also give the credit to the people that are behind them whenever credit is to be divvied out. One more thing, too. He realized that his army, they had to make sure to train up every single member. His belief was, just as the Marines say, you're only as strong as your weakest cadet. You got to make sure that every single soldier in that line is disciplined and knows how to fight and knows and is well trained to handle whatever is coming at them. And so he's going to make sure to train up everyone, not just think like, okay, I got to have like 500 of these 1,000 men have to be well trained up and know what they need to do. He wanted to make sure that they're all battle hardened and ready to roll whenever a conflict hits. Now, we get to the one negative person here, George McClellan. He was a terrible communicator. He had a distaste for his leaders, whether it happens to be Abraham Lincoln, Edwin Stanton, whomever. He was way too confident in himself, but never confident in anybody else. He was also going to toss the blame to everyone else and never, ever take it on his own shoulders. A terrible communicator, total lack of trust with the people around him, and was not willing to wear any loss on himself. So he wants all the praise for himself, but he's not willing to actually take any of the blame. A good leader divvies up, hands out the praise, but any kind of failures, they put it on their shoulders and say, I've got to be better. I've got to do it. I've got to improve. Now, altogether, I want you to take a look at some of these things, and specifically the last couple questions have to do with some of these traits that are going to make you a more successful person, things that are going to help you succeed in life. I think about one like Stonewall Jackson. When he poured over those maps, he was committing to that situation. It's no different for me than if somebody is studying heavily for a test or for an exam. You want to get something done, you want to move ahead in life, sometimes you're going to have to buckle down and you're going to have to study like crazy to make sure you pass that exam, pass that test, and then move on. Get that certification, go get that job, but you're going to make sure that you've done everything possible to be prepared for that. So there are things we can take from these lessons that these leaders showed us about success and employ them in our own lives. So go to this forum, respond to it, and I'll see you next time.